Hello, everybody. This is your host, Referrals for Jewish Adulting Podcast. Today, I have a special guest with me. His name is Rabbi Binyomin, and he serves as the Director of Relief Resources. And since joining it in 2002, he has grown the organization into an international multi-service agency with 11 offices globally. He specializes in connecting each individual with the mental health professional or service best suited for their needs. Relief Resources is today one of the most prominent mental health organizations in the Jewish community. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. So I became aware of Relief when many years ago. I don't even know where I got the name from first, but I was looking for a therapist. And I remember reaching out to Rabbi Slansky in Baltimore. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of amazed that it was very specific. It was like, I need a woman, and I need they need to have something in this field, and they have to, it was, and he was okay with me having these kinds of questions. And I'm sure since that time, it's only gotten more advanced. So I would love for you to tell me, first of all, how did Relief come about? Where were you in your adult processing that you realized there was such a need, and how did, and what did that look like?
So I wish I could take the credit for coming up with the idea for Relief. I can't take that credit. I was the first employee, but the organization was founded by two very, very special individuals. One by the name of Shia Ostreicher and the other by the name of Sandy Orenstein. These are two people that have done a tremendous amount of work in the Jewish community, but probably nobody's ever heard of them because that's how they like it. They're mm-hmm. very under the radar. But together they're a chesed factory, in terms of what they've done in a variety of areas. But I think the way it started was that Sandy was very involved in setting up one of the medical referral services. The Jewish community has a number of organizations that will help you find the best cardiologist, the best oncologist, the best kidney specialist. And he was very involved in setting up one of these organizations, well over 20 years ago. But he realized that if you need an organization to find a good medical professional, where you could ask your brother-in-law for, who's the best cardiologist, how much more so would you need such an organization for mental health, where, there is a stigma involved in mental health and people are less willing to network in the way they would normally network for other areas. And at the same time, this other person, Shia Ostreicher, had this idea. Somebody made the shidduch between the two of them, and the rest, as they say, is history. So they started this organization. This was back in 2001. Sandy was basically manning the calls, as a volunteer. I mean, he has a full-time job. He works, but he realized very, very quickly that this was going to be bigger than he expected. Because within the first year, he had over 200 people reach out to him for help, and I knew Sandy from a previous life. I used to run the professional career services for Aguda, for the Agudas Yisrael. I knew Sandy from there, and he asked me to join. Again, we were in our infancy. We really hadn't, we're starting from scratch, but within a very, very short time, this grew very, very quickly, because there is a tremendous need for this type of information, and people just started calling and calling and calling. Today, we get 200 calls by 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Wow. Is that across the country, or is that for just the New York site?
So that actually number is from the New York site. So New York site is certainly the biggest of all the regions. The New York office covers, of course, the Metro New York area, everything from South Jersey to Connecticut. Mm-hmm. But then we also have offices. We have 2 offices in Canada. We have an office in London. We have an office in Israel. We have a Baltimore, Florida, the Midwest, Los Angeles. Right. So we're getting calls from all over now.
Right. And how do you, I would imagine that there's sort of like a responsibility that the organization has to take when they're saying, I'm going to refer somebody, and I need to know that the person I'm referring to is safe. Is there a process where you vet the mental health professionals that you're referring to? Like, what does that look like?
So that's a great question because it's really very, very important for people to understand. This is not a service that you could just sign up and be a member, if you pay membership or something. We don't charge membership for clinicians. You can't just sign up. You can certainly be in touch with us and let us know that you exist, but you are going to go through a vetting process. The vetting process is extensive and it continues. It never really stops. It starts with some basic research that we do on the clinician to find out, what their training is, what's their experience, what's their expertise. Um, we're going to then conduct an interview where the clinician will be interviewed by a number of staff members. And again, this interview is again to determine their clinical background, their ability, any specific interests that they have, any the experience that they have, um, and then they are graded by the people who interviewed them on 10 different areas. How humble they are in the clinical realm, how invested are they in their clinical knowledge, how much training are they going for, even though they've already obviously we're talking about people who have already been to school and already licensed, but the training never really stops for somebody who's a really good clinician. Um, so they're judged in all these areas, and given a score. But then the most important thing is the feedback that we get once we start making referrals. So the process, let's say, would look like something like this. So clinician is either in touch with us or we're in touch with them because maybe we heard about them. We may have heard about them from other people. We may have heard about them from their colleagues. They will fill out paperwork. There's quite a long questionnaire that clinicians need to fill out. And then again, we'll start with the interview process. If they've made a good impression on the interview, and we start recommending them. So we will always be very, very clear and honest with the people that we're recommending to. We'll tell you exactly where we are in the process. For example, we'll say, we met this clinician 3 months ago. Person made a very, very good impression on us. It looks on paper to be a really good match for what you need, but we don't have that much feedback yet because we only met them 3 months ago. So we'll be very open and honest with the people that we're making the recommendations to, which people, of course, appreciate. And then we'll follow up with those people after making recommendations. And over time, we will gather feedback and we'll be able to have a really clear picture of who this clinician is, what they're good for, and really be able to dig down into that data to really tweak it and figure out not just are they good and effective clinicians, but sometimes what type of person would they be better suited for. One example I always give is a certain therapist that we were dealing with who was an OCD specialist. And there was a group of people that, when we followed up with them, did very, very well with him. There was another group of people who did not do well with him. And we were able to figure out what did those people have in common. Okay. So in
Mm.
this particular case, what they had in common was that they weren't motivated. They needed somebody to motivate them. And we spoke to him about this, and he said, "Yeah, I'm not a motivator. If you need somebody, who needs that kind of extra kick, that motivation, I'm not the guy." And so now, after that, we adjusted who we sent to him, and then we get much better results that way because we're only sending him.
How would you know if someone was motivated?
So we asked the question. We asked them, when somebody calls us up for a referral, part of the process, besides asking for symptoms and what's been going on and what level of care have you had until now, and if you have had any medication, things like that, we'll also ask them, what type of person do you think would work best for you? Male, female, younger, older, right? A soft hand
Mm.
holder, a tough love type of person.
Right.
Um, and these type of questions also, we'll ask them specifically with OCD, are you motivated to help yourself, or do you need somebody to hold your hand along, through the process?
Hmm.
And so we ask a lot of these type of questions to get a picture of not just the clinical background, which of course is very, very important, but almost as important, and maybe even as important, is it going to be a match on a personal level?
Right. So what would you do if like an issue arose with the feedback? Obviously you hear in this situation he worked well for other some people, didn't work well for others. So what if there was a consistent issue with a clinician? How would you guys handle that?
So certainly that comes very often. Now, if it's something that can be addressed, for example, let's say we're getting numerous reports that he or she answers the phone in the middle of session, right?
Mm.
So that's something that we'd pick up the phone. We have relationships with these clinicians. We'd say to them, this is the feedback we're getting. It's not a good thing to do. We would recommend very strongly that you don't do that. So that's easy when it's something that can be fixed like that. But we'll also be getting feedback on clinicians that then it's just not effective. Okay.
Hmm.
Now, it's this is where the fact that we're dealing with high volume makes a very, very big difference. You're always going to get on any clinician, you're always going to get a group of people that did very well and a group of people who didn't do well at all. Okay.
Right.
So the outliers, you sometimes have to ignore, because you can have, if you have, 20 reports, you can have one that says they're the best things in sliced bread and one that says they're the worst person that ever lived, right? So
Right.
what you really want to look at is the aggregate of the data that you're collecting. But when you're seeing a pattern, okay, when you're getting two, three, four, reports and they're all the same and it's a negative report, then the first thing we do is we put the person into caution, okay, because it means that they're really, there's something's wrong here. And caution can be, well, caution can be, that they're perhaps not keeping boundaries, or they're that we've had situations, unfortunately, where people were inappropriate, right? So you have situations where clinicians can do things that they're really not supposed to be doing, and that obviously gets flagged very, very quickly. And
Hmm.
then you have situations where it's not so clear. That just this person didn't have a good experience. Now, if this person didn't have a good experience, it doesn't mean that the next person's not going to have a good experience. We try to figure out, what was it about your experience that was not positive. And again, what we're doing is, because we're dealing with such high volume, we're watching the world from 30,000 feet, right? So we're able to see patterns.
Right.
So if we see that we're getting the same report, either positive or negative, from multiple people, that really helps us guide and make predictive referrals in the future.
Right. It occurs to me that, you can't please everyone all the time, and that we're also dealing with a population that might be emotionally fragile. That's why they're
Correct.
reaching out to you in the first place.
Absolutely.
So it occurs to me that that could also be a mitigating factor. You could think, okay, this person hates this person, but they're also borderline personality. They're also not medicated properly. They're also like, there could be other things that are like, it's nuanced. It's not so clear cut. It's not like the burger doesn't taste good, period. It's
Absolutely.
like, yeah.
Absolutely.
So
And again, in different people's experience can be also, colored by different issues. One example I always give, it because it was a funny story when it happened. There was a certain psychiatrist that we were using that really had a tremendous track record. People really liked him. He was a nice guy, and he was a very, very good clinician. And I sent a man to him, an older man who had bipolar disorder, and his adult children went along with him. These were people who did not speak English very well. And when I followed up, they told me that they were very, very upset with the doctor because he insulted their father. And I said, he insulted your father? It's just such an unusual thing to happen, because he was really a very nice guy. So he said, yeah, he called our father a maniac. I said, maybe he said manic. They said, yeah, what's
right.
the difference? What's the difference? Okay.
Oh.
Okay.
Right.
So, sometimes you just want to check, you just ask that extra question, and you're able to figure out, what went wrong.
Right.
Um,
Right.
you know,
Okay. So that seems, again, it's a nuanced thing. How much time would you say goes into the back end work, like before someone gets to a referral? What is, it's all this that you're describing sounds like a lot of like labor intensive time, effort. Like you said, you're collecting data, you're aggregating it, you're getting feedback. That seems like it would take a significant amount of time. Um, what would you say percentage wise do you think the organization spends on that part alone?
so you have hit on the main message that we would love to give to people. Most people don't realize what's involved in this. They kind of think it's a phone book. You put in male 27, and it spits out a number, it spits out a name for you. Exactly what you said is true. We spend a tremendous amount of time, um, on this process of figuring out who's a good clinician, how good are they, who are they good for. It gets constantly reviewed, and it's what makes it even, more challenging is that it's a dynamic system. It's not static, meaning that a who had a good reputation today, in 3 years from now, that may have changed, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've had many situations where we had very good clinicians who we started using, and then they became well known in the community, and then everybody started using them and throwing everything at them, and they became too busy. and they didn't know how to say no, and their level of service went down a lot, right? So,
Yeah.
it made a very, very big difference. So, 2 years later, the same clinician, he's still a good clinician, but he became so busy and so stretched, stretched so thin that we were getting a lot of negative feedback, right? So it
Right.
changes, and we're constantly monitoring, to make sure that the clinician that we met maybe 5 years ago is as good or better instead of the opposite. Now, again, it happens the other way also. Sometimes you meet somebody, and they're in the early stage of their career, and they're kind of, like a green banana, we say, and we say we'll put him on the shelf and see if he ripens, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of work, and again, we have constant meetings, quality assurance meetings and quality control meetings to go over the people that we met, the people we met 6 months ago, to find out, who's doing what. We also have internally, um, basically a report that's created, we call it a went to report, meaning if somebody went to the therapist that we recommended, right, and we have a report of how it went. This is distributed every single day. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And there are dozens of reports on clinicians. You have to realize we speak to about 3,500 people a month.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Wow.
so that's a lot of
That's a
information.
lot. That's a lot of,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a lot of information. Um, but again, when we're doing this work, when we get the feedback, so we, just like I said, there was a rating system. When we interview clinicians, there's also a rating system based on the feedback, and that rating system is split into two parts: into how the clinically effective, were they clinically effective, and how did you like their personality? And then again, that gives us an average score. So when you're looking at somebody who was scored by, let's say, 2,000 people, and they have a very high rating on their personality, but not such a high rating on their clinical ability, so then that tells you something, right?
Right.
On the other hand, if it's the other way around, clinically they're very good, but their personality is, average or better, or worse. Again, it gives you a picture, and sometimes it doesn't mean you can't use that person. Sometimes you can say, listen, this person's a really, really good clinician, but they have a tough personality. Is that going to bother you? And sometimes they'll say, yes, that's going to bother me. And sometimes they say, no, I just need somebody really good. Okay,
Right.
I don't need a friend. Okay.
Right.
Um, so it's very, what you said at the beginning, it's really a very customized kind of concierge service that takes a lot of time. It does take a lot of time. It's very, very labor intensive. Um, there are no shortcuts. Believe me, we're looking to see, how we can be more efficient and more effective, and can AI do any of this for us? Um, but there's a human element here that, I don't think you can get around. You can't take out. Again, it's that feeling that you get when you meet a clinician, that you get a feeling for who they are as a person, and then try to make that match with the person who's calling you. I don't think a computer can do that yet.
Right. Right. Not yet. Not that we
Right,
know of. Right.
right,
So do you have I'm imagining you guys are a nonprofit and you have a board of
yes,
directors.
right,
Is that right?
yes,
And are there like, I imagine there's professionals, there's I'm imagining Revs on the board. When do you take an issue to, like, do you have a VOD? Do you have something that you need to ask a halacha shaila? You have a Rev that you go to? What might be a situation that you would need to do that for? Is this like a lashon hara thing, or is this, because I can imagine that lashon hara would be a big issue
right.
when it comes to all these referrals and feedback.
Okay, that's great. So I would tell you like this. So first we have a couple of boards. So first we have our board, which helps us run the organization. There's the non-medical professionals, just people who are in business and people who understand nonprofits. Then we have a medical advisory board, that's made up of some of the best people around the country, around the world, people that we have access to and are able to run questions by. Sometimes we can say, there's a case that came our way that seems very, very complicated, and it's not clear to us, what they're describing, and we can call up one of these people and say, listen, if you were seeing this case, what would you do with it? Where would you take this to? Or would you see this case? Okay, these are people who are top of the line, very, very busy people, but every once in a while, if you have a very challenging situation, we can call on them. So that's where the medical board comes in. And the rabbinical board, believe it or not, we actually don't have a rabbinical board. It was
That does surprise me.
Yeah, it does surprise you, right? So I'll tell you exactly what happened. When we first started the organization, we said, okay, we have to have a rabbinical board because everybody has a rabbinical board. So should we put this one on? This one wasn't available. This one was busy. This one, and we didn't end up doing it. And now, strangely enough, it has actually worked in our favor in a certain way because we're nobody, we're everybody. We're not Sfaradim, we're not Ashkenazim, we're not Yeshivish, we're not Hasidish, we're not modern Orthodox. We're everybody, and everybody calls us from one end to the other. Now, of course, we are from people, and we do things according to halacha. So yes, we do have people that we speak to when we have questions. So the most prominent is Eli Rudny, who's Rosh Yeshiva Namir. I'm sure many people have heard of.
Mm.
Um, but interestingly enough, the reason why it's limited in terms of the work that we do. I'll give you an example. Um, let's say the question comes up: should you see this clinician who is a very very good clinician and he's a frum person, or should you see this clinician who's an excellent clinician, unbelievably good, top of the line, top of their field, who's not Jewish? Okay. Now,
Right.
let's say we go and ask our rabbinical authority. Okay. And let's say, as an example, the person who's calling us is calling us from Williamsburg. Okay. And we go ask our rabbinical authority. And we said, and we come back to them and say, well, our rabbinical authority said it's okay. You can go to this non-Jewish person. Who's your rabbinical authority? I never even heard of him. Okay.
Right.
So what we do is as follows. What we do is we will help, we will say, okay, this is your question to ask your rabbinical authority, whoever he may be. Okay. This is the question, and this is how you should, this is the question you should ask, and this is, you ask your, whoever your dastar is. Now, for us internally, there are questions that do come up every once in a while, like you mentioned before with Lashon Hara. Um, so the general consensus that we have in terms of all the people that we've asked about certain things that in terms of which doctor to use. So we actually, when we opened up the office in Eretz Yisrael, we went to speak to many Gedolim in Eretz Yisrael, and they all told us exactly the same thing. You use the best doctor, okay, as long as they're not anti-frum, which in America is not such a big deal. Now, in Israel, maybe it comes up a little bit more, but in America, it doesn't happen that often.
Right.
So that's as far as that. But as far as Lashon Hara is concerned, so this comes up very often when we work with other organizations. And they'll ask us, can you give us a list of, specialists who do X, Y, or Z? And we always tell them that the list that we have is not secret. It's not a private list. The problem is that we can't tell you everything about the people on this list because some of it, you know, would be Lashon Hara, but some of it's worse than Lashon Hara because we don't know for sure. We just have a gut feeling. So, for example, we might meet a clinician and have a gut feeling that something's wrong. Okay.
Right.
Maybe they were too arrogant. Maybe they were, just whatever it is, right? But it's not based on evidence. Okay. So for me now to go tell others, other organizations or other people that this person made a bad impression on us, that would be a problem. Okay. And we don't do that. Okay. Um, and we don't do that even, let's say, for example, if somebody calls us up and asks us, I'm thinking of going to Dr. So-and-so, is he good? Right? And we don't have a good, feeling about this person, or we have some bad information about this person. We won't say, no, this person is not good. We'll say instead, I'm not that familiar with his work. Let me instead recommend you to somebody that we know better. Okay.
Right.
So yes, lashon hara is definitely an issue. Certainly, there have been issues where things have come up that we needed to speak to a Rav about, and we have different people that we speak to. But really, most of the time, the question is going to be the client's question, and so therefore, we'll help guide them in terms of who they should ask.
Right. Right.
Now, when people do ask me though, which Rabbanim hold of you, I usually answer, which Rabbanim do you like?
Right. Right. That's good. So a few things. One is I know that in 2002 there was probably a completely different uh feeling towards the mental health ish, community, whatever that word is, but that the stigmatization of the mental health, going out for resources, calling even a Jewish organization up, anonymity, and all of that. I'm imagining then was much worse. How have you seen it change? What have you guys done to help with that process that destigmatize, mental health, if anything? I'm not sure if that's even in, within the purview of relief, but I'm just curious how they've handled it over the years.
So there's no question that things have changed. When you call relief, you can call and be completely anonymous. Certainly when we first started, I think many, if not most people were anonymous. Today, it's actually a very, very small minority, a very small minority that are anonymous. Um, and even in Eretz Israel, where the trend lasted longer, even there it's changing. So I think part of it has to do with the fact that, again, as an organization, I think Baruch Hashem, we have a good reputation that we are very, very careful with confidentiality, and anything that is told to us stays with us. Um, but in general, I think that because there's been so much more awareness in the last few years, and I don't know if you can open up a magazine without seeing some mental health article, right? Whether it's
Right.
Mishpacha or Ami or whatever it
Right.
is, there's a lot of discussion about mental health, so it's much more out there, and therefore certainly that has helped a lot. People I think are much more willing to reach out and get help, and more aware of what's going on with them, with their relatives, with their friends. Um, but there's always going to be a certain amount of stigma to mental health.
Right.
In fact, I look at it differently. I don't look at it so much as stigma. I look at it as privacy.
Right.
There's some medical conditions that you'll discuss with your friends, and there's some medical conditions that you won't discuss with your friends. And so this kind of falls into that category. You may or may not want to discuss your mental health issues because it's a privacy issue. It's not even so much of a stigma issue. Um,
Right.
and I guess because we are seeing such numbers. I mean, as I mentioned before, we speak to 3,500 people a month, but of those, we're getting about easily 1,200, 1,300 new unduplicated people every month on average calling us. So when you're talking about those kind of numbers, I don't know if stigma is the issue that we need to worry about so much because, again, as long as people know that where they're calling, they can either stay anonymous or it'll be confidential. People are calling, so that's the main thing.
Well, I know that one of the reasons that I'm so open about the fact that I'm in therapy is I think it's like the worst kept secret. Like everybody knows a chedva has a lot going on. And so if it's like, it's like if you're on a diet and you're keeping it secret, like people know that you're on a diet. It's not that hidden. So I just call it like it is. I say, oh, my therapist said that I should, calm down when I'm speaking to people or whatever. I'll be very open about it because I'm sure people are thinking, wow, she should really she should be seen. You probably haven't listened to previous episodes, but my mother was sick and I was dealing with that for 15 years, so I'm very open about the fact that I go to therapy. Um, what one of the things that you keep mentioning is the amount of people that call, the amount of referrals. Is there any other metric that you use to establish success in your work?
So it's a tough one because we're dealing with such a wide range of issues and such a wide range of individuals. Um, we could look at one person who's, I'm just giving an example, a 15-year-old boy with some mild anxiety. And that's going to have, a certain trajectory that hopefully will be, taken care of very, very quickly, and you'll see, major turnaround. On the other hand, you can have a 40-year-old woman with bipolar disorder who's non-compliant, and that's going to have a totally different, trajectory. So it's hard to look at this group and say, okay, so what works and what doesn't work. But what we try to really get in terms of feedback and in terms of seeing how things are going, um, is did they follow through on the advice that we gave them? Okay. Or did they follow through at all? Did they, and even if they didn't listen to us, if they, ended up going somewhere else, that's also could be helpful to us for information, but hopefully helpful for them as well. And then most importantly, are they seeing progress? Are they seeing progress in the process? Again, sometimes that process can take a long time. Sometimes it could be, hopefully fairly quickly. But the main thing we want to see is did you follow through? And if so, how's it going? Okay.
Right.
And again, there are bumps along the way. There are questions that people have. This is not a organization where you call up and you get your referral and it's have a nice life.
Right.
The average person speaks to us between 8 and 10 times in the first 2 months.
Mm.
There are a lot of questions that people have. Most people have not had that much experience in the mental health world. They may not realize, how long the process takes. They may not realize what steps need to be taken, and so we try to give them as much information as possible. Um, And in that process, again, there are things that will come up. Sometimes they'll have legitimate concerns, right? And very often the answer is going to be, did you discuss this, with your clinician? And they'll say, yeah, should I? I say, yeah, you should.
Right.
Um, and then sometimes their concerns are because they just don't understand the process. Okay. Um, so, there's a lot that needs to be looked at in terms of figuring out, what's working, what's not working. So it's kind of hard to give that kind of metric, like
Right.
20% of people or 30% of people.
Right.
That doesn't
Right.
doesn't
Right.
work that way.
Right.
But overall, what you do want to see, like I mentioned before with these winter reports, for example, if we're seeing that 9 out of 10 winter reports are going well, that's great. If 9 out of 10 were not going well, then we're doing something wrong.
Right. Okay. I hear
Okay.
you. So let me ask you this is kind of a personal question, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Go ahead.
What do you do? I can imagine that this can be kind of an emotionally demanding job. You're working with people who are emotionally fragile or who have a lot of stuff with a lot of history or baggage that are coming up. And even I'm imagining, I'm going to ask you about emergencies, but I could just imagine that there is this urgency to get it right.
Hmm.
How do you handle the emotional demands of the job? Do you worry about burnout? Do you do any strategies, coping strategies to make sure that you don't get too involved in the story and in the process and too invested, because that's like a boundary issue. Like what do you how do you handle that?
Okay. So I'll answer this not for myself, but for the team.
Okay.
Because, again, on a team, you're going to have different people with different personalities. Um, some are more resilient, some are less resilient, right? But you're absolutely right. It does take an emotional toll. Um, we found that it's much harder for the people who are working in smaller communities where they know the people that they're dealing with. Whereas, in the New York community, very often we're just, we're dealing with people that we don't know, so that makes it a little bit easier. Um, there are, some very difficult cases that we've dealt with that did not have such good endings. And again, when you've been working with somebody for a couple of years and things, end in a very, very bad way, that again takes a toll. And internally, we've created a kind of a crisis response protocol, to help people, the people on the staff, deal with the emotions. But yeah, it's something that we are very cognizant of. Burnout is something that you have to be very careful. You have to have some time off, and you have to be able to disconnect from time to time. Um, but we
Yes, I
also,
actually I actually have a podcast, just a little plug here. I have a
okay,
podcast coming out about burnout. It's
okay.
already so if you're interested, you can listen to it when it
Yes,
comes out.
absolutely. That's a big issue.
Yeah.
But it's important also for us to understand in our role, because we're kind of, we're not the ultimate helper, right? The clinician is going to be doing the actual clinical work. We're just making that connection. But we also, need to very, very strongly realize that we are going to do our best, and we always try to do our best. We always try to treat every person who's calling us as if they were our brother or sister, because they are. Um, but then ultimately to know that once we've done our best, really Hashem is in charge, and it's not in our hands after that. So we can do what we could do, and we need to know that we need to know that we've tried our best, but ultimately it's not in our hands and it's not in our control.
Yes, that's so important. Um, I think I'm going to be doing a podcast on codependency, which also will handle that same kind of issue of this person has their own personal relationship with Hashem, and whatever happens to them in their journey, that's between them and Hashem. It's not between me and them and me and this organization. I can just be the shliach to find a good or even a shliach for bad. It goes both ways.
Right.
Um, so now I'm imagining that you guys don't do this too often, but do you have a response for like emergency services? Like if people have an urgent medical, not med, well, they have an urgent need for a referral. Do you have that? Or is that something that you say, call 911, we can't handle that?
So we do, but it depends on the situation. So, if somebody is having an emergency where hospitalization may be necessary, they can page us and get through to us immediately. Now, again, we're not mental health professionals, so we are very, very careful not to step over that boundary. But if we assess, it really depends on who's calling and what they're telling us. So there are many times where somebody will call um and be overreacting to what's going on. Somebody could be having a panic attack, and their mother, who never saw a panic attack before, thinks that this person needs to be hospitalized, and the reality is they don't need to be hospitalized, and being hospitalized would probably be more traumatic for them. So depending on what's going on, we're able to sometimes say, wait 1 second, this is not what you think it is. um, Other times, of course, if there's any question, we always, of course, have to err on the side of caution. But there are times where we could say, listen, we're not sure, right? Maybe this person does need to be hospitalized. Maybe he doesn't need to be hospitalized. But perhaps we can get this person in front of a psychiatrist now or today, okay? And let somebody put eyes on him and say, okay, yes, he does have to be hospitalized. He doesn't have to be hospitalized. That's something that, because we have access to a wide range of mental health professionals, that we could really play that role. Now, again, of course, if there's any question, the answer is call Atzala.
Right.
And we're very clear that we are a referral service. We are not clinicians. If you're calling me at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're calling the wrong number, because a referral is not going to help you at 2 o'clock in the morning, right? If you're calling me at 2 o'clock in the morning, you need Hatsala, okay?
Right.
And so we're very clear about where that line is. But again, if it's a question and we can get this person be seen and make a safe assessment, and perhaps avoid hospitalization, we will try to do so, because again, hospitalization, if it can be avoided, is important. But again, if it can't be, then we have people available to help us out with whether which hospital has the beds available, trying to expedite the process, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Right. So, you mentioned that the range of people that come through the organization is tremendous. That there's all different, Jews of all walks in life and all different parts of the world. Is there a specific population that you stay away from, or you you guys are, or is it like all like a, master of all trades? You're just doing everybody? Because I imagine that, veterans, or maybe substance abuse issues, or there could be certain types of situations that you guys don't want to touch with a 10-foot pole. Is that true or false?
So again, there are specialized services even within our organization, to deal with some things that require it. So, for example, eating disorders, right? Eating disorders are quite dangerous. They're the highest mortality rate in anything to do with mental health, and they're very complicated. Um, so while most clinicians stay away from it for that reason, we can't stay away from it because it's an important piece. It's a big chunk of what goes on. So what we do have is we have two people on staff who specialize in eating disorders. And one woman who's been with us for many, many years, and she's quite well known and very, very highly respected, because she has a tremendous amount of experience and tremendous amount of knowledge. And again, has really helped guide so many families and so many mostly young women, through the process. So, there are definitely specialized areas when it comes to, for example, substance abuse. There are some parts of the substance abuse world that there are other organizations that are better than we are, and we'll tell people, this organization may be able to help you more than we can. We have internally, though, one of the areas we have as a specialty is a division that specializes in researching facilities, drug rehabs, trauma facilities, these type of things that, and again, all around the country, because for the average person, it's very, very hard, if not impossible, to really
Prohibitive.
figure out. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, the cost is prohibitive, but even
Yeah.
figuring out who's for real and who's not for real, because it's very easy to look like you're for real, and to have a nice program and a beautiful website, but you may not be providing, really effective care.
Right.
So that takes a lot of work on our part. So that's, another area of specialty. So, there are different areas, even, we also have people who specialize in children, because children present differently. The clinicians who work with them are a different group of clinicians. So we have different areas of specialty. And there's no group that we say we won't deal with. We'll try to help whatever we can. But again, if we realize that there's a specific issue that another organization can do better than we can, we'll be happy to pass it along.
Right. Have you seen any trends? And this is a hard question to ask because your referral service, you're not like a mental health, think tank necessarily. But have you seen or noticed a trend, maybe in 2002, the common trend was PTSD. Everybody was, post 9/11, whatever they were dealing with, the Paguas in Eretz Israel and whatever, and then it sort of became a depression, and then what did you see an ebb and flow of different um you know chunks of mental health issues, or it's basically just a hodgepodge all the way around basically throughout the years?
So interesting. The percentages have been fairly steady. Let's say, for example, the breakdown between male and female, right? Over the years has been, very, very interestingly, super steady. Um, it's always been 51-49. Now it's flips, sometimes this way, sometimes that way. But it really stays, very, very much in the middle between male and female. Whereas children has been predominantly male, so let's say 60% male, okay? And
Mm-hmm.
geriatric is predominantly female,
Mm.
okay? And that's been pretty steady over the years. Now, as far as the types of issues that have come along, right? So again, more or less steady, but there's been some spikes. So the most common spike, as you can probably well imagine, is anxiety.
Right.
Um, and the biggest spike we saw was during COVID,
Yeah,
right? During it,
absolutely.
yeah, right. And after COVID,
Yeah.
that obviously anxiety went through the roof,
Yeah.
which is to be understood, right? It's
Right.
expected. Um, but other than that, other than major, events like that, it's been pretty steady. I mean, certainly there are little spikes that take place, after October 7th, there was, obviously a little bit of a spike, these type of things, but that usually goes back, fairly quickly. Um, but
So
overall, it's been pretty steady.
interesting that I know that like probably like cases with ADHD has probably increased significantly, because it didn't used to be as you know noted that people had that. Now it's like very well documented that this is an issue that people struggled with 20 years ago, but it just never came, to we didn't have enough knowledge and information about it. I would imagine that that is one of those things that have increased across the board.
So actually, interestingly, we were just, as a group, we went to, the American Psychiatric Association has a conference every year. So this year was in New York. So we go to the conference. We go for a couple of reasons. We go to meet new doctors, and we go to learn, to sit through the sessions and to learn. So there was a session there discussing the prevalence of autistic spectrum disorders,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and how over the last 20 years, the prevalence, especially of what used to be called Asperger's, but they don't call it Asperger's anymore, but what used to be called Asperger's, has gone up tenfold.
Mm.
Okay, now how's that possible? So the answer is
Right.
it's not possible, right?
Right.
Um, but there were a number of factors that are involved in these numbers. Okay, so one of the issues was awareness. Okay, like 20
Right.
years ago, they may not have been aware, they may not have called it that, they may have ignored it. Okay, so
Right.
that takes that is a big chunk. But the other issue was services. Okay.
Right.
If services are available, then the diagnosis is going to be given much more often, and they can see the difference when they look at rural versus urban settings. Okay. In an urban setting, they're going to find much, much more diagnosis of ASD, and in a rural setting, much less because there are services in an urban setting. Okay. So there are a lot of factors that are involved in the numbers that you see. You have to know, when you're looking at the numbers, where these numbers come from, what makes up these numbers. Um, but yeah, there's no question that awareness plays a very big role. I think in general, people ask us all the time, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, did we have these problems? Okay,
Right.
in the Jewish community. And so the
Right.
answer is we probably had a lot of them, just we didn't pay attention to them or didn't know what they were. Okay.
Right.
Um, that plus the fact that, Baruch Hashem, the frum world has grown so much over the last, 1,500 years, or 80 years since the war. The numbers that we're dealing with today, when we're talking about percentages of population, so 2% of the population 50 years ago wasn't such a big number. 2% of the population today is a big number,
Right.
you know.
Right. Right. So I have one. I think I have one final question. I think this is the final question. Actually, it's close to the final question. How about that?
Okay,
How you guys don't charge for your services?
correct.
So how does Relief stay afloat?
So that's a great question, especially if anybody wants to, discuss it with me
Yeah,
further.
exactly.
So Relief stays afloat through private donations. This is an organization that's helped a lot of people. And people like what we do. They like the way we do it. And I've told people, if you like what you saw, pay it forward. Help us help the next guy. And Baruch
Right.
Hashem, people come forward. This is mental health doesn't discriminate. We deal with poor people, we deal with middle class people, and we deal with some of the richest people in Klal Yisrael. Um, and again, if people are happy with what they saw and they understand the need for this, we invite them to join us and help us help more people. And so Baruch Hashem, people do that.
Where can people go to donate to Relief?
So the website, which is www.reliefhelp.org, RELIEFHELP, reliefhelp.org/donate, and we'd be certainly happy.
Right. I'm actually going to post that link in the episode description.
Thank you.
Is there anything, it sounds like it's an amazing organization, from coming from really not understanding what was underneath the iceberg of the Relief organization. There's just this little tip. It's like you call them up, they give you resources, but not understanding the process that you went through and that you go through is tremendous. And is there, just for the end, to just wrap it up, is there anything that you'd like to tell the audience, things they should look out for, things that they should, what's the best way to utilize the resource, what's, anything that we haven't already covered in the course of this very interesting conversation?
So the message we always like to give people is that there's really good help out there. And if you need help, you should definitely not hesitate, and you should get the help, because there's really good help and it can make a tremendous difference in your life. The one caveat is that don't try to do this by yourself. Because one of the things that we tell people is that while we have a database of about 8,000 mental health professionals, we only use about 20%.
Mm,
Okay. And so if you're trying this on your own, the odds are against you. So
right.
do your homework, of course, call Relief. You can call others as well, but do your homework, try to find out about the clinicians, and really work to get to the right person, because the right person will make all the difference in the world. And the wrong person will be a very frustrating experience.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much for your time, Rabbi.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. And hopefully you should continue your good work. You should help as many people as needed. And Hashem should continue to give you what you need to make this organization continue to thrive.
Amen. Thank you so much. Thank you so much again
So,
for having me.
no problem. Have a good day.
Okay, thanks.